And we'll get to that as well. So this is Arise America.
It's Wednesday, June 26th. I'm Gary Anthony Ramsey, and once again, you're inside the Arise newsroom. Steve, what do we have coming up in the rest of the show?
Coming up today, Gary, we're going to be talking to two journalists in Brazil who've been in the streets covering the recent protests that have been going on there for over a week.
Okay. And what else, Lauren?
And Karen Hunter and David Webb will be here to give their take on the headlines of the week. It should be interesting to see what they have to say about the Supreme Court's decision on the Voting Rights Act.
Okay. And also continuing coverage of the killing of Trayvon Martin, the George Zimmerman trial, all that and much more. Let's go back up to the studio.
Gary, thank you very much. And we're going to go right back to Washington, D.C., where our Rise News correspondent, Colin Campbell, is standing by. He has been monitoring the rulings of the Supreme Court, and there is another decision that has been handed down. Colin, go ahead.
That's right. Regarding Prop 8, it's been vacated and remanded to the Ninth Court Circuit of Appeals. So this means it goes back and they have to start all over again. It's particularly in California. So this is the latest ruling from the Supreme Court. As more details come out, this was a 5-4 ruling, but the details on what the arguments are still emerging. Debbie.
Okay, Colin, thank you very much. Okay, so again, I'm joined here in the studio by Tariq El-Shabazz as well as Marc Morial. So this is not one of the scenarios that I sort of was prepared for. It's been vacated and remanded back to the Ninth Circuit Court. What does that mean in practical terms?
It means basically we're going to start from the standpoint of the first appeal that came up to the Circuit Court. In other words, the law that was in place at the time that was appealed is the law that will be in place until there's a ruling by the Circuit Court. Third Circuit is where I work out of. That's why I said the Circuit Court. The problem with this is that unlike the opinions of some people that think that the last DOMA ruling actually indicated that same-sex marriage is okay as far as the Supreme Court made that determination. This is the actual case that was going to make that determination, and they punted. They didn't want to get involved with that. And I don't see, in all honesty and candor, I don't see the Supreme Court getting into ruling on morality in this regard. I think they will punt every single time.
And there was plenty of speculation that they would do that they would not make this type of sweeping ruling.
And it's interesting because they used an important ground by saying that a private party sought to defend the constitutionality of Proposition 8, as opposed to the state of California, which refused to defend it. And they said, we've never allowed a private party to defend the constitutionality of a state statute when the state has refused to defend it. So it goes back down now, all the way back down at the district court, which was the first court to hear this. They declared Prop 8, as I recall, unconstitutional. So there's going to have to be a sorting out to see what the status quo is. But most importantly, the Supreme Court declined to sort of confront the issue of marriage equality head on. That's the takeaway from both of these cases today. And I think most people who had closely followed the arguments predicted that the Supreme Court would remand the Prop 8 case and strike down the Defense of Marriage statute. And this is somewhat predictable.
And it's clear, it absolutely is predictable. If we want to look at it, you're talking about a Proposition 8, which was voted on by people, citizens in the state of California. So they're looking at that differently as opposed to something that is denying the actual rights. Now, we're not talking about same-sex marriage. Let's be clear when we're talking about rights, but denying federal rights to someone, federal benefits to someone, which DOMA covered. That is a clear distinction. I do not see, and in all candor, I do not see the Supreme Court getting into the point of legislating morality as it relates to marriage. Some people will argue, well, Tariq, they argue or legislate morality all the time. They do when it comes to things that are beneficial to the political party that put them in office. But when they come to situations like this, where there is a solid split, and there is a split with regard to the actual union, if you will, or recognized union, that's a better term, recognized union of a woman and a woman or a man and a man, the Supreme Court indicates that we won't get involved with that. We'll protect your rights, but we won't get involved in whether or not that should be recognized.
I want to bring someone else into our conversation. Thalia Zepatos is on the phone, and I'm sure you had hoped that the Supreme Court would make a different ruling and that it could be applied in other states around the country. What's your reaction to this ruling, Thalia?
Well, we had somewhat expected the action of the court today. But to the last speaker, I just do want to point out that the Supreme Court in the past has itself stated 14 times that marriage is a fundamental right. So they have gotten involved in marriage before. Whether you think that's morality or not, I'm not sure. But, this means that we're going back and looking at what the District Court of California said. And in August 2010, they said because California has no interest in discriminating against gay men and lesbians, and because Proposition 8 prevents California from fulfilling its constitutional obligation to provide marriages on an equal basis, that was the basis for the court concluding that Prop 8 was unconstitutional. So, if this ruling does restore the freedom to marry in California, that will mean now totally more than 93 million Americans, nearly a third of the country, will be living in a jurisdiction with the freedom to marry. So it is a very, very significant day, even if it just means restoration of marriage in California and, of course, overturning of DOMA.
All right, Thalia Zepatos, thank you so much for joining us on the phone. We do appreciate it. We want to take a break and take a look at some of the other news that is capturing headlines around the globe in our Arise News World Wrap.